Developing the Leader Within podcast, leading beyond limits.
Welcome back, everyone. If you haven't subscribed, please do so right now, as it'll help getting our show to others and help us reach our next milestone. And today we are celebrating Christmas week and are speaking with Gary Wise, a fellow brother of mine from the Navy. Gary is a retired Command Master Chief in the U.S. Navy and a naval science instructor at Vanguard High School, JROTC. He is also the CEO of Wise Leadership Solutions, where he empowers organizations and individuals with actionable leadership strategies tailored to navigate complex challenges. Now, Gary, welcome to the show.
All right, man. Thank you for having me, brother. How you doing? It's good to see you.
I'm doing well. Good to see you as well. Now, folks don't know, we collaborate on our ventures, right? Our business ventures, and support each other that way. But you are doing something that's amazing, which is investing in tomorrow's future through this youth program. And folks, if you don't know anything about JROTC, you got to get wind of it and all the effort that is put into a program like that. But the beauty of it is that what Gary's doing is he's investing early into tomorrow's futures, leaders, and it is an amazing thing to see. Now, folks, we will be speaking about the power of wisdom, leading with clarity, courage, and character. And Gary, before we get into that conversation, brother, tell us a little bit about you that I may have not mentioned.
Honestly, you nailed most of it. I would say I'm a Christian. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ, right? My Lord and Savior. I'm a dad, right? So I've got two sons. I've got an 18-year-old son now, and I have an 11-year-old son. I'm a husband. Been married to my wife, Erica, since 2002. Been together since 2001. So I was a young third-class petty officer in the United States Navy on recruit duty when we met, and been together ever since. And we actually met in 2001 at a high school JROTC competition. She was a high school graduate who was coming back to volunteer for her little sister's high school program. And I was a recruiter who was there working as one of the judges. And so it was definitely full circle to be able to come back and to be able to spend an anniversary at that same school, being a part of a JROTC event, bro. God is good, man. God is good.
That is beautiful, man. You hardly ever get things that come all around full circle. So that's beautiful to hear that you both were able to experience that and among the youth as you are so dedicated right now. Now, Gary, you emphasize wise leadership, right? Now play on your on your name there, right? But wise leadership as a differentiator in today's workplace. In your view, what separates wisdom from experience, and why does that distinction matter for the modern leader?
It's communication. In my opinion, wisdom is the ability to communicate your experience. If you are unable as a leader to communicate what you've been through, what you've seen, what you understand, and what you know to be true, or even what you don't know, right, you're going to struggle. But when you can take the experiences that you've had in this world, on this earth, and turn that into something that you can communicate to people, they will accept that as wisdom. Um, and for me, that's the big picture, right? A lot of people in this world have had experiences, and unfortunately, when they struggle in communicating it, that's the challenge. When you think back to that person who has the wisdom in your thought, in your mind, I always think of an old stoic soul who's going to just tell you the thing you need to hear. And that person typically can be calm. They can see it through the lens of experience, but then they can say the words and they can say the message that makes the most sense. And then on the reverse, it's wisdom to also recognize good advice, good information, and to receive that communication, right?
Yeah, and communication is key among leadership, the roles, what we do, how we execute daily. But as you mentioned, if you can't do that as a leader, you've lost the ability to influence anything because that's the medium that we use to make things clear. Wisdom is something that we need personally, especially in the workforce and collectively as we are leading. Now, we're becoming more diverse. You know, things are changing in the diversity realm
Mm-hmm.
around our nation, but the world continues to be diverse, right? And we're not just leaders here, sometimes we're leaders abroad. And as generational diversity grows, you are seeing that because you're leading a group of young men and women that are going to go forward and become tomorrow's leaders. It's a
Mm-hmm.
big generational gap between us and them. But as generational diversity grows inside organizations, how can leaders apply wisdom to bridge gaps in values, expectations, and communication styles across the workforce?
That's a good question, and it's our reality. We were both in the military, and in the service, you could be in a room with people from 3, 4 different generations all in the same work center. I was always the youngest guy in the room. It felt like, and I was almost always in charge. I made chief petty officer quickly in my career in the Navy, and it was not abnormal for me to have senior first class petty officers, second class petty officers, even that had more years in the service than I did, which would equal to time in alive, right? Because they just been in longer. I think when it comes to generational diversity, and then also taking that experience and leveraging it with the students I'm working with now that go as young as the age of 14, and I'm 48, it starts with never forgetting you don't know what you don't know, right? You got to be humble. You have to have the wisdom to recognize you don't always understand what's going on. So ask for information, look to use your initiative, use your intuition, use your ability to get people to talk as a leader, because the more people will talk to you, the better you're going to do. You need them to communicate so you can understand what the concerns are, what the priorities are, what are the areas that they were frustrated, what are the areas that they're excited about, right? And you can use those as indicators to then see if you can line those up with other people in the workforce. We all know that a person who's a senior in high school is much different than a freshman in high school. Just so much happens in that 4-year growth period, right? And so I've got to be methodical when I'm aligning a 14-year-old with an 18-year-old to the same team. So that way they're not annoying each other, they're not exacerbating each other. They're finding the areas that they can be mentor, mentee, that they can work together, be inspired, be proud to be a leader. All of these things are available to you when you have generations that are in your workforce. Uh, I also think though you do have to give them respect where respect is due. I was watching a thing today that said, you're old if you can answer yes to all these questions, and it was questions like, have you ever used a landline? Have you ever gone to a Blockbuster? Right? Have you ever used the yellow pages or the white pages? And it is it's insane to think how far our community, our technology, and our society has come just in the last 15 years. Uh, that being said, I do believe the younger generations are very nostalgic about our older generations, almost like we were when we were kids. I was very nostalgic hearing my grandparents' stories about life when they were coming up. So I think the best. You remember when the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy told us to tell stories, tell sea stories, tell the sailors stories about your career. I believe that one of the best ways to get the generations to be aligned in the workspace is to get them talking and telling things about their backgrounds and about reasons why they're doing what they're doing and what their goals are for the future, because that's something we can all agree upon typically, right? We maybe can't not control where we all come from, but we're all probably going very similar places, at least at work.
Yeah, that's a fact, and the fact that you bring up storytelling is very powerful because a lot of previous history, that's how people were sharing where they were, where they came, and where they're going, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
that's how we were able to go from one generation to another. And sometimes it seems like leaders forget that that's one of the more powerful tools you have which is how do I connect with this young person, or how do even I connect with an older person if there's such a gap? And it's usually through some story that we may have similar either actions or experience, and then all of a sudden, bam, the connection is made, the conversation becomes lively, and now we both are actually getting something out of that moment. And so, great point there, to use stories in a way that will connect it to your people. And I think a lot of leaders are missing that. Now, you mentioned the youth, you mentioned future, and now it seems like we're always surrounded by some type of artificial intelligence. My phone is listening. I'm getting ads, and I'm like, I just thought that I didn't even say it, but chances are I said it. But here it goes. We're getting these ads. AI is taking over in a lot of ways, and in a fast-paced AI-driven world where decisions are often made quickly, how can leaders slow down enough to incorporate reflection, discernment, and wise judgment into their daily leadership practice?
Oh, it's hard. It's hard because we all want a quick turn. There was this cartoon strip that I used to read growing up called Calvin and Hobbes. And it was about this young boy and a tiger, right? And I would always look forward to the Sunday paper. I'd be at my grandparents' house out in Colorado. They'd lived out in the country. There was 2, 3 TV channels max. The year was 1984, 85. But I would look forward to the Sunday comics and I would read that comic strip. So then fast forward, I'm in the Navy, I'm a sailor, and I'm buying Calvin and Hobbes books at the bookstore at the Navy Exchange because I did not know they had consolidated all these comic strips. And I really loved the perspective that the author or the artist would use in these comic strips. He would make a lot of really good points in these comic strips. And in one strip in particular, and I've used this analogy a bunch throughout my leadership journey about slowing down time. And it was, the dad was working at home and he was working at his desk. And he said, I remember before the mailing system was a thing, a rush job was a month. And then he said, I remember when the telephone became a thing, a rush job became 2 weeks. And then in the next page it says now the email comes up and a rush job becomes 3 days, right? And then I remember being on board the USS George Washington and we were all carrying radios on our hips, and it was like no matter where I went, a rush job was now, right? I need this now. I need this now. And I remember telling my boss one time, my leader on the ship, I said, "Sir, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, and I cannot continue to get pulled off different things because every time you get a new idea or a new task or you want me to come talk to you." So I would have to purposefully leave my radio on my desk to the point where they would threaten me with like, "Senior chief, you don't start carrying your radio around more, you're going to be held accountable." And I would just tell them, "I'm working." Like I cannot always be getting distracted. And when I became a command master chief, I learned one of the most important things I could do for my commanding officer was get him decision making space, right? Learn how to put layers between him and the problem so that we could get recommendations, information, give it time to flesh out a little bit and not rush to make an immediate decision if you can help it. You know, Before I was a CMC, I was a damage controlman. So for those of you listening, in the Navy, I was an emergency responder. And it was my job to go to places that people might be hurt or in trouble of dying and get them safe. So I would train my people that the first thing we would do is get on station and make sure nobody was at risk. And if no one was at risk of being hurt, we would then lock it down and slow it down because at that point we own the scene. There's no reason to put ourselves at risk when there's nobody at risk of being hurt. And so, for a leader who feels like they're having a hard time slowing down decision making or slowing down the process, first question is, what's the rush? Is there a real sense of urgency, or is there a perceived sense of urgency? Is it really a crisis that you have to make an immediate decision or not? Typically, it's not, right? Uh, it always takes it's always a smart move to talk to people, to have an understanding as to what the consequences can be from your decisions, and then trust your counselors. Have good advisors around you that can best support you when it comes to making a decision. All that being said, when it's time to make the shot, take the shot. And that's just how it goes. You're the leader, you're in the arena. It's not a zero defect game. We're all going to make this bad choices, or we're going to make mistakes. Own it, move forward from it, and learn from it. Gain that wisdom we talked about earlier. Don't be afraid to do what you got to do, but don't you should not feel you have to rush unless there's something significantly going to happen bad to your people or your team.
I definitely love giving yourself the space to decide. You know, you provided that for your CEO and your leaders, and as a leader, you have to love yourself enough to give yourself space to decide. And not all things need to be rushed, like you said. Oftentimes, rush things you have to revisit. So you might
Yeah.
as well give yourself the adequate time at the beginning so that you can make the best decision, like you said, with all inputs coming in for a better outcome. And I love that. So thanks for sharing that. Now, most people are afraid of accountability, but some people are afraid of even applying empathy. So wise leadership often requires balancing empathy with accountability. How do you coach leaders to develop the wisdom to know when to support, when to challenge, and when to course correct the team?
When to support, when to challenge, and when to course correct. Uh, a few things for me when it comes to accountability. I look forward to it personally. I like to hold myself accountable, and I'm not afraid of the accountability piece. And I feel like if you're doing things for the right reason, you're not afraid of accountability. Because if you authentically make a mistake, you don't mind being told you made a mistake. That's matter of fact, you'd rather know. That are afraid of accountability typically are possibly making less than best decisions, right? And so I think that if there's a space where people are afraid of accountability, that's a deeper conversation. But I welcome accountability, and I always have, because I know that there's a lot of moving parts in the world. Empathy is a superpower. I struggle with sympathy. I wasn't trained in a society that's always sympathetic, right? I was raised by petty officers and chiefs and leaders that would not always lead with the sympathetic arm. And empathy was the superpower that taught me I could recognize what a person is going through, and I could relate to that. And I could connect with that, what they're going through. Now, when it comes to do I support or do I course correct? Honestly, it depends on what's going on in the moment. 'Cause not every situation is the same, but I always tend to start with grace. I like to be supportive and try to understand what's going on with whatever the situation is. Typically, by the time it comes to me, it's got a few other leaders' teeth already in it, so they've got opinions and perspectives, and hopefully they did the right thing. Because a lot of times throughout my life, I've had to course correct the leaders that were unfortunately junior to me that possibly didn't handle it the right way. And that's a challenge because you don't want to steal their energy, and you don't want them to be defeated because they were trying, but they've got to get mentored as well, right? They've got to learn, hey, I wish you wouldn't have handled it this way. For example, one time I was in the hangar bay of the USS George Washington, and I was the engineering duty officer for the day. So I had a whole duty section of sailors that worked for me. Probably about 100 people total were in my duty section, and I was frustrated at the time. It was around 2011. So many years ago. I'm a young senior chief petty officer, and I'm frustrated because we were all supposed to meet in the hangar bay at a certain time, and people didn't show up. Well, you can't start the day if everyone doesn't show up and agree to the jobs that we have to do. We've got to man the watch bill. We've got to man different things that if you don't show up, we got to go find you. And of course, I've got to set the standard, which is we're all going to be here and we're not leaving till everyone gets here. And I remember finally, once everyone got there, I was holding them all accountable very, very, very visibly in the hangar bay, right? Using all the words, right? Using all the words, telling them exactly how they were not going to do this again and we were going to be better than this because our duty section was going to be better than this, right? Because that was my team. And I'll never forget, after I was all said and done, the command master chief at the time was across the hangar bay watching me, right? And he comes up to me and he pulls me aside and he says, "Hey, Gary, I really appreciate everything that you just did there. And it takes a lot of courage and a lot of energy to put that all out there. But in the future, my advice is maybe you don't do it in that open of a setting. Maybe you don't calibrate that manner." And he gave me some wisdom. He gave me some words of advice. And that sat with me so well because he didn't chastise me for doing it. He actually said he was proud of me for having the courage to maybe be that guy that was leading that strong in that moment. But then he gave me the counsel. And then, fast forward 10 years later when I'm the command master chief who's advising young, energetic leaders, I'm able to give them very similar things. So when it comes to course correcting, oh, brother, I think when it comes to course correcting, and once we recognize we're on the wrong course, we got to stop, right? Let's not belabor the process. Let's not argue about it. Let's not debate about it. Let's not keep going the wrong way because we're afraid to call it bad, right? Let's own it. Let's say what's wrong. Let's stop. We're great at this in the service. We'll stop everything. We'll bring everyone together. We'll sync up where are we going? Where did we get off track? How do we fix it? And what we don't need to do is be blaming everybody for how we got there, right? There's always time to second guess. There's always time to be a quarterback sitting on your couch yelling at the TV screen. But the reality is, what we need to do is go forward. And then once we get that part done, then we can do some debriefing, some lessons learned, and gain some ideas as to how we got off track, so we don't let it happen again in the future, right? You said support. You said course correct. What was the third one, Enrique?
Well, I said challenge.
Oh man, I, for my style of leadership, I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm a rough and tumble kind of a guy, right? I'm a deck plate sailor, which for those of you that don't know, I mean, I'm a surface Navy engineer. I throw red meat to the wolves, right? Like I like to challenge people. I do. I'm not even gonna lie. I like to look them right in their eyes when we're talking, and I like them to tell me their truth. And if they're not confident in that, I want to help them learn to be confident, right? One of my goals with my students is to teach them how to handle people like me in this world because not everyone's going to always be super kind and gracious and tell you what you want to hear, right? And if you can learn to stand your ground and communicate what you need to communicate anywhere at any time, I think you'll be better prepared for this world because unfortunately, the higher you go in society, the more difficult it can become, right? I was threatened more as a senior chief in the Navy, as a person who was a career professional. I was all in. I was threatened more pound for pound than any other time in my entire career at that point. And if I wasn't prepared to handle that stress and look that line right in the jaws and say, "Hey, sir, you got your jaw open over my head. My head's in your jaw, but this is the truth. You need to hear from me. And if you want to bite my head off, well, I can't really do a whole lot about it. Do what you got to do." But there's not any more of me coming around the corner. And I think that having that challenging space matters. Now, in order to have that, you do need to have trust, right? You got to have the ability for them to know that you're doing the best for them and that you really care that they get the best out of whatever it is that you guys are doing as a team. You don't just get there overnight. But the reality is, I'd rather start off with a challenge than have to get up to the challenge point later because I started off with support. Just you to me. right? Now that's with professional military personnel. With students, a little bit different, right? But you know what else? The standard is the standard. The standard is the standard, man. I'm not going to lower my standard because you did not pay attention in the classroom, or I'm not going to lower my standard because you did not listen to when the instructions were given. Now you get to be held accountable, right? But there's also communication styles, if that makes sense. You know, not everyone needs to get yelled at. Not everyone needs to be called a name that's not their name, which I'm not a fan of that. And that's one of the areas leaders can let me down, right? Don't call it one of the kid names the kids call each other's dummy, right? And I know they don't mean it in a bad way, but it's not a person's name, right? Don't call them a dummy. If you're going to calibrate them as a leader, communicate them with professionally and be consistent, right? Be consistent.
Yeah, very, very powerful insight there. Uh, Definitely a lot to weigh in and consider as leaders if you're going to do the three things that were mentioned, right? Support, challenge, and course correct. And upon all of the different things that can be done, then there's the individual, right? And so I love how you say, you can't just throw the same thing at different people because it's just going to land different. And then you as a leader, you'll lose some credibility because you weren't ready to lead a diverse group. Great comments there, brother. Now you talk about wisdom as a powerful force for creating healthy culture. What are the practical daily habits leaders can adopt to consistently act with wisdom, especially under pressure?
So a leader, in my opinion, has to have a plan for the day. If you go into the day without a plan, you're going to get thrown off your game quickly. Even if I remember when I was on board the George Washington, I would keep sailors from my organization in the classroom next to my office just for the oh crap things that came up out of nowhere. They were literally just on standby to handle the things we did not see coming. So I did not have to pull everybody else off the tasks of the day. Like you have got to wake up in the morning and you have got to already know your plan. When I was a Navy recruiter once upon a time, right? And they taught me some really cool tools. And one of the things they taught me was to do a daily production review, which would mean at the end of every day, I would review everything that I did during that day and did it give me the results I was looking for. And then I would take everything I did that day and I would project forward the next few days whatever I needed to do to accomplish my goals. Whether I achieved my goals for the day or not, it would then cascade into the future things. To this day, I still use that tool. When I was on the ship, before we knocked off for the day and everybody went home, I'd get all my work center supervisors together. We'd debrief the day. We would talk about what we got done. If we didn't get the job done, I'd tell them go get dinner. We're going back to work, right? But if we got the work done, everyone knew we were going to go home. You know, for the school, I go into the school in the morning and we have a set schedule and a set routine. And I tell them, here's the plan so they all know what's going to happen. Now, uh, in life, we don't always control all the factors of things that come our way. We just control how we respond to those things, right? The enemy always gets a vote, right? And for me, what's important about those moments is if I'm not able to communicate with the entire team why situations have changed in the plan or why we're going to do something different, I've got them to, they need to be able to trust me. So I got to train them that in certain moments when I'm not telling you everything you think you need to hear, trust that there's a reason behind that. And when the time is right, I will give you the entire debrief, right? And for the teams that are really high functioning, that's not an issue for them because they just inherently trust that if we all knew the information and we had time, we would share, right? And away you go. And so I think that for leaders that want to not get shaken off of their game and out of their day to day plans, having a plan, having the wisdom of a plan for your week, for your month, for your day, whatever works for you. Right? I do all of the above, right? I literally do all the above. I still run long range training plans, short range training plans, because I'm projecting out school years, right? And it gives the students a lot of comfortability when they can see the schedule and they understand what's coming. But that was the same thing in the military, leading people, even in chaos, fire, we had checklists, right? There's a checkoff list and a casualty of a fire. We're going to make sure that there's nobody in the space. We're going to set the boundaries. We're going to set the smoke boundary. We're going to set the fire boundary. We're going to get the teams put together. It's all a methodology. How do you get that comfortability? You've got to train your people, man. This is where I feel like leaders are really failing out there in the world. They're not training their people on the areas that cause them concern. So my mom is currently a manager of multiple nursing areas, right? And they had a challenge not too long ago where several of them lost power of their buildings and they didn't have access to emails and they couldn't open doors because the doors were all locked with like electronic locks and all these things. I told her, I said, that's a huge training opportunity for you to get that information to the whole network and share those lessons learned with everybody. Because what do you do if that happens? That's a training opportunity, right? Through training, you build teams. And so if I was going to give the leaders any advice, it would be do consistent training with your people on whatever the priorities you think they need to know, not just how to do their job, because I like to think they know a lot of that stuff because you hired them, but how to be a team and the way you want them to be a team.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you mentioned the plans. Most people I've seen, especially out of service, there are no plans. I mean, it's just a work day. There's the
Yeah,
days just to work, and you're like, well, what are you working on? Oh,
that's it.
I'm working on stuff. I'm like, geez. But if you do have a plan and you do see those opportunities to train and educate, I think that most leaders will be doing a whole lot better than the ones that I've seen. Now, thank you for all of that that you shared. And if there's somebody listening, somebody viewing, and wanted to get a hold of you, what do you have coming up? Where can the viewer or the listener follow or support your endeavors?
So honestly, probably the biggest thing right now is my Words from the Wise podcast. It's on all podcasting stream locations. It's on YouTube. Wise Leadership Solutions, Words from the Wise. That's probably the best place to go. I'm pretty busy day for day right now with school being in session, right? Doing a bunch of things on the weekends with the kids, but I'm doing pretty consistently putting out my podcast. I'm looking to step more into the realm of teenagers, adolescents, parenting them. I think with my own children coming through adolescence, what I'm doing day for day, pound for pound, I've been spending a lot of time catching up with my old friends from the military, but I'm about ready, I think, to let that pack go and then move into this other space, right? Um, I was dabbling in the corporate sector a little bit here and there, and I'll work with people corporately if they contact me and if it's a good fit. But my number one priority, without a doubt, is my students in the ROTC program.
Well, outstanding. Well, we'll have all the links necessary in the show notes and the video for folks to get a hold of you and support you. Folks, today's episode is sponsored by the Global Trends Magazine, the Outlier Project, Fantail Services, Ascend Meditations, and Chop AI. And if you've enjoyed this episode and learned something interesting about the topic covered today, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and let us know by leaving a comment. Tune in next week for another episode where we dissect leadership from another angle. And as we like to end the show, success to you and Merry Christmas.